Evening, everyone, and welcome to our council meeting for February the 12th of 2024. The recommendation is that we call our meeting to order. May I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Dunstall, seconded by Councillor Martin. All those in favor? That carries unanimously, and we'll be jumping right into closed. The recommendation is that a closed meeting of council be held on February 12th, 2024 at 5:30 p.m. at the Wilmot Administrative Complex in accordance with Section 239(2)(f) of the Municipal Act 2021 to consider the following. 1, a planning matter, which is Section 239(2)(f), advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose. Number 2 is air monitoring study, Section 239(2)(f), advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose. Item number 3 is procurement matters, Section 239(2)(f), advice that is subject to client solicitor privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose. And lastly, terms of reference, Section 239(2)(f), advice that is subject to solicitor client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose. May I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Dunstall, seconded by Councillor Cressman. All those in favor? That carries unanimously, and we will be back here for our 7 p.m. meeting. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our council meeting for February 12th, 2024. We've just returned from close, so we will need to reconvene into open at 7:22 p.m. May I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Dunstall, seconded by Councillor Martin. All those in favor? That carries unanimously. And our moment of reflection, I just want to wish everybody a happy Lunar New Year. And for all those who celebrate, this year is the Year of the Dragon, which began on February 10th with billions of people across the globe celebrating. May the Year of the Dragon bring you courage, strength, and boundless success. And I will now turn it over to Councillor Sadhu for the territorial land acknowledgement.
We have gathered in Wilmot Township on the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Mississauga peoples. We want to acknowledge the importance of the Dish with One Spoon Covenant, a peace agreement made between the Indigenous nations before the Europeans arrived. It characterizes our collective responsibility to each other and Mother Earth. We should take only what we need, leave enough for others, and keep the dish clean. By acknowledging this covenant and the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people, we are reminded of our important connection to this land where we live, learn, and work together as a community.
Thank you very much, Councillor. For additions to the agenda, I wanted to note that the order of procedure has changed since the agenda was published last week to align with the procedural bylaw. Accordingly, disclosures of pecuniary interest have been changed to item number 7. And we do have another addition to the agenda this evening, which is item 11.8 under correspondence. Item 6 is the adoption of the agenda as presented for February 12th. May I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Cressman. All those in favor? That carries unanimously. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest this evening? Seeing none, we do have the minutes of the previous meeting, which is the January 29th, 2024 regular council meeting, to be adopted as presented. To get this on the floor, may I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Dunstall. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? That carries unanimously. We do have one public meeting this evening, and we will hear all interested parties, people who wish to speak on these matters. If the decisions of the Council of the Township of Wilmot are appealed to the Ontario Land Tribunal, the Tribunal has power to dismiss an appeal if you do not speak at the public meeting or make written submission before the bylaw is passed. I now declare the public meeting open. Persons attending as delegations at this meeting for any of these items are required to leave their names and addresses, which will become part of the public record, and you are hereby advised that this information may be posted on the Township's official website along with your email address if provided. I would like to remind all delegations for this evening of some guidelines for participation. Applicants and agents for the applicants have 10 minutes to speak. All other delegations will be given 7 minutes to speak. If you conduct yourself in any of the following manners, it will result in immediate muting or removal from the meeting, including interrupting councillors, staff, or other delegations, derogatory statements about councillors, staff, or others, and hate speech or defamatory comments. Now that that's out of the way, the item for the public meeting is 9.1, which is ZCA 0124 for 1276 Wilby Inc. / the Planning Partnership for 1276 Wilby Road, DS-2024-03. And the recommendation is that this report be received for information. To get this on the floor, may I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Dunstall. And this is a public meeting in respect to zone change application 0124 for 1276 Wilby Inc. / the Planning Partnership of 1276 Wilby Road. I will invite our Manager of Planning and Economic Development, Andrew Martin, to introduce the report, please.
Thank you, Mayor Solomon. This application proposes amendments to the zoning bylaw to deal with proposed farm labor accommodations on this property. The owner plans to develop an intensive fruit farming operation on this property. It's currently made up of 2 properties, each about 25 and 26 acres respectively. The application applies to the combined parcels together. Existing buildings on the property right now are proposed to be converted to accommodate farm laborers that are anticipated to be needed both for the establishment of the farming operation as well as the ongoing operations related to harvest and what else would occur related to that operation. The application specifically then deals with two items. The first one is to allow for one of the buildings to be converted to 3 units for farm labor accommodation. And the other one deals with existing additional dwelling unit policies. So as of right now, this property can have a single detached dwelling that could contain up to 2 units, or in theory, a single detached dwelling with 2 units and then a secondary building containing 1 unit. So ultimately 3 dwelling units are permitted under the additional dwelling unit policies. So this application proposes to convert one of the buildings to 2 units. Essentially to meet the additional dwelling unit policies, that would be considered to be the main building, and then the singular unit within the existing single detached dwelling would be the additional dwelling unit detached. So the application essentially proposes to flip the buildings that applies to, and then those associated regulations would be adopted. So ultimately, the application contemplates the modifications to additional dwelling unit policies, and then proposes another additional building that would be specific to farm labor accommodation. Staff have been working with the applicant to ensure that some of the pre-submission comments that were provided have been fully addressed, one being the merger of the 2 properties, which has not yet occurred, and the second one is just additional verification of the nature of the dwelling units proposed to ensure that, it in fact does align with industry standards, and they've indicated that they're working with the Region of Waterloo specifically about accommodations. So we've asked for additional clarification on that, and then also verification that in fact the type of fruit farming proposed for this property is viable in this climate. So with those 2 items and the merger of the property, those are the primary issues that are still being addressed. And then, if there's any comments raised through this public meeting, staff would consider those as well, and then come back to council with a more detailed report and recommendation in the future.
Very good. Thank you very much, Mr. Martin. Does council have any questions of a technical nature for Mr. Martin? Okay. Oh, yes, Councillor Cressman.
Yes, I was wondering, is this contingent on the orchard being planted and into production? I saw your concern about whether, in fact, this was a viable, whether plums were viable in this area. I'm aware with my previous work in Vineland area that plum pox was a big issue. They actually had a program to pull a lot of the plum trees out. Whether the varieties being contemplated planted actually are resistant to plum pox, because that can devastate a plum orchard. And I guess the final thing is, I am also aware of abutting one farm that I rent within the city of Kitchener, that there's this structure built supposedly to support as a bunkie, quote unquote, and yet there's no orchard planted, nothing used, and it's just a rental accommodation that is in that location. So that's, I guess, where my questioning was headed.
Through Mayor Saladin. So ultimately, those were similar questions that were posed both at the pre-submission stage and then after the application was received. Certainly staff have questioned the need for housing at this stage until the operation, is up and running. The comments received, and I think the applicant and their consultant are here perhaps to make a presentation after this to speak more to it. But they did provide comments indicating that they needed to provide accommodation for workers to actually establish the operation. So the planting of trees and some of the provisions to get it up and running. So that piece they'll be able to elaborate on a little bit more, but certainly that's where we're wanting to see that justification to say that in fact this type of housing, whether all of these units are needed at the outset or whether it should be a staged approach once the operation is up and running, those are the sorts of discussions we're having at this point, and would provide further information when we come back to council. But again, the applicant may speak to that more in their presentation.
Very good. Any other questions for Mr. Martin, councillors? Okay, seeing none. We do have one registered delegation on this matter. As Mr. Martin mentioned, it is Brandon Simon from the Planning Partnership is delegating this evening on behalf of the applicant. Brandon, you're welcome to come up. Thank you for joining us in person tonight. And you will have 10 minutes for your presentation.
Thank you very much, and good evening, members of council, township staff, members of the public. I don't think I'll need 10 minutes. Obviously, Mr. Martin already provided a great overview, and we've already had some questions that are kind of really at the heart of figuring out timing and sequencing for this type of situation. So I'll try to keep this brief and really just provide some additional information just for your early consideration. Also happy to answer any questions you might have at the conclusion. Next slide, please. Or I don't know if I have a clicker. I just tell you next slide? No, that's fine. Just to give a bit of information, this is an air photo of the existing property. You can kind of see between the two fields, those are the two lots in question that Mr. Martin mentioned earlier. So on the east half, which is address is 1276 Wilby Road, you have the existing single detached dwelling kind of in the front of a cluster, kind of a localized cluster of buildings, which is exactly what you want to see in agricultural areas, obviously to preserve most of the site or as much of the site as possible for actual farming. So to the rear of the single detached dwelling, you have two existing former agricultural storage buildings. They're both currently unused. And then to the rear was a former barn that was previously demolished. So this just shows the context of those existing buildings that are located on the site. Next slide, please. In terms of what's proposed, the applicant actually operates 3 successful orchards in the Township of Wilmot, growing a range of different fruit, apples, pears, plums, nectarines. And I'll say as well, the applicants here as well today, if you'd like any additional information on kind of the actual agricultural approach, I am certainly not an expert when it comes to that, but it's a real passion project for the applicant. In the existing orchards in Woolwich, the first grade harvest is actually sold for direct consumption, and then the second other grades are actually used for distillation. The applicant owns and operates a distillery in the Township of Woolwich, making brandy with that other produce. So very kind of interesting, very productive agricultural use, and that's exactly what's proposed here as well. So in order to, well, I'll get to it a bit more later, but very big investment. The site's almost 21 hectares combined. So the early estimate is that the investment in trees alone will be about $1.5 million. Big investment. So part of the issue we're trying to figure out is we need, the applicant needs some assurance that they'll be able to provide the farm worker accommodation needed. But obviously, you have to plant it. It takes a few years to get to maturity. So there's a bit of a process there as well. But we're working with the region to ensure that the design of these buildings and units complies with all appropriate regulations for farm worker accommodation. Obviously, it's a big national interest and became, I think, even more so, during and after the COVID-19 pandemic. So a lot of ongoing discussions, and as Mr. Martin mentioned, we're working on kind of an updated submission right now to address some concerns, but just a bit more information. Next slide, please. In terms of zoning compliance, the proposed approach of reusing those existing buildings complies with the majority of the zoning provisions in the zoning bylaw. And in particular, I'll note that the location of the two farm worker accommodation buildings is located over 100 meters back from Wilby Road. So not only are the existing buildings being reused, but they're located well back from the road. So should be a very kind of localized conversion or change. And I would imagine most people driving by wouldn't even notice that a change has occurred. Next slide, please. I won't dwell too much here. Mr. Martin did a great job explaining kind of the nuances of what's proposed. Really, it's just kind of a different way of looking at how the current additional unit policies apply, as well as providing for recognition for that seasonal farm worker building as well. Next slide, please. So in terms of the overall benefits of what's proposed here, obviously a significant investment in terms of actually planting the orchard. And with that, I think, comes for a really good, productive agricultural use with a lot of spin-off, value retention and value-added activities available, including the distillery, as I mentioned. By reusing these existing buildings, We're not having to take away any active farmland. We're making good use of those buildings within the farm cluster, and that's, I think, really paramount importance for any policies regarding development in agricultural areas. It also means we can use those existing driveways, so no real change or impact to Wilby Road. The other thing we're looking at, I mentioned earlier, obviously there are these federal, provincial, regional guidelines for farm worker accommodation. We're trying to kind of find a right balance here between obviously designing that accommodation for that use and making sure that the township's satisfied that that's what it's for, is for farm worker accommodation, but also providing for an enhanced quality of life over perhaps more traditional bunkhouse farm worker accommodation that you might have seen in the past, which is kind of an open bunkhouse where you got, a bunk. We're looking at individual bedrooms for workers here, some additional sanitation facilities. So trying to really kind of go a step above what might have been proposed in the past. And in terms of the actual demand for it, OMAFRA actually published in 2018 some very detailed guidelines estimating per acre, if you were to start an orchard, how many farm workers and what other capital costs you could expect to accrue. And so we based our kind of design of the scale of this based on those guidelines. Those guidelines anticipate the need for about 21 seasonal farm workers for an orchard of this size. We're proposing 18 seasonal farm accommodation for 18 seasonal farm workers, and then in the second building, accommodation for 4 year-round farm workers. So very much hitting right on the mark with those OMAFRA guidelines. So we think we've appropriately scaled this for the nature of the operation, and obviously getting permission to do it is important to give the applicants some comfort that they can go ahead with that investment. As Mr. Martin mentioned, we're still working through some additional details back and forth, responding to some comments. I expect I'll come back with an updated submission this week to try to address those comments and provide some additional information on our correspondence with the region on the design of those units. But we've had a great working relationship thus far with township staff, and I suspect we'll find a way to address these final concerns and comments as well. That concludes my presentation, but I would be more than happy to answer any questions if you have any this time, as well as the applicant if you'd like any additional information on the agricultural side of things.
That's great. Thank you very much. Councillors, any questions at this time? Just a reminder, this is received for information tonight. Yes, Councillor Martin.
Through you, Mayor Salonen, I just wanted to say I appreciated your presentation. I defer to my colleague who actually is a farmer. To me, I thought I saw plums and I thought, that's great. Looks wonderful to me. Bring them into Wilmot Township. But obviously there's much more complications than what I realized. I just think it's a great venture. I'm glad to hear you're interested in following the guidelines, making sure that the residences actually are good residences. That's good to hear. And so if you follow through on everything you're saying, it sounds exciting to me.
Very good. Councillor Cressman.
Is it, you don't have to answer this, where are the locations of the two orchards in Woolwich and the distillery, just out of information?
Yeah, so there's one at 881 Weber Street, which is actually right in kind of the stockyards, just at the north end of Waterloo. Yeah. Just if you know, there's a big kind of greenhouse or a nursery, kind of just to the south of that is a large orchard, and that's actually, it's apples, pears, plums, I think nectarines, so, and a bunch of different varietals of some of those as well. And we're actually going to be submitting an application to the Township of Woolwich imminently, which will also be looking to add some farm worker accommodation there, as well as some additional kind of agriculture-related uses. One of them that we're looking at, or that the applicant's looking at, is kind of like a research center to try to do some additional research on the varietals that make the most sense in this location. We were just chatting before the meeting, and he mentioned there was a kind of this new pear varietal that everyone thought was going to be great, and double blooming. I'm not quite sure what that means, but can't be good, I guess. So he has a real vested interest, obviously, with those existing operations and with these as well, to really see this work. And as I said, really a passion project. So that's the location of the one. The two others, I believe, are around kind of Country Squire Road on the east end of the Township of Woolwich.
Looking forward to seeing the project as it develops.
Any other questions or comments, councillors? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much for joining us this evening, and yes, looking forward to seeing this project go forward.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. At this time, I will ask the clerk to please indicate if there are any persons present, either online or in person, who wish to address council on this matter. Nope. Okay. Seeing none, I will now call the vote. Again, this is just for information this evening, so all those in favor, that carries unanimously, and I now declare this public meeting closed. Delegations, we've already heard our delegate was for the public meeting. We don't have any other delegations for this evening. On to items 11, our correspondence. Does anybody want to pull any of these items? Councillor Martin.
Through you, Mayor Salonen, yes, I'd like to pull 11.6 correspondence from Nancy Burse, and I apologize if I pronounced the last name wrong.
Please go ahead and make your comments.
Burris? Okay, Burris. Thank you. I wanted to ask staff some questions about the process. In this letter, Nancy Burris has written, "If it ain't broke, don't fix it," in reference to people parking on the road. Many people have expressed concern about this ongoing issue. I know that as staff, you've been diligently working. My understanding is we are required to do something because by approving the zoning, we then have to take into account parking and how it affects safety, as well as liability for the township. So I'm just wondering if staff, possibly Director Okrafka, Manager Martin, Director Mullenhouse, if there's anything that can be said in the way of update.
I will turn it over to Mr. Martin.
All right, thank you, Mayor Salonen. So, like I said, at this point, from the planning policy perspective, essentially we're at a point where we've worked through some outstanding matters with the region, and that those pieces are addressed. It comes down now to dealing with the ongoing safety issues with respect to on-street parking. Whether that be through on-site parking solutions or dealing with traffic calming and other parking prohibitions. So that piece is the ongoing discussions, particularly with the City of Waterloo and Wilmot line. Director Mullenhouse is here to speak to his ongoing discussions with the City of Waterloo, and that's ultimately the last piece that we need to have addressed before we can return to council to consider the applications.
Thank you. Director Mullenhouse, did you want to make a comment?
Through you, Mayor, just in terms of timeline. So we had spoken, I think, a few weeks ago about a meeting with the City of Waterloo, and we have had a number of meetings over the last 2 weeks. Being a boundary road, obviously, for Wilmot Line, it is a shared road, and so we do have to come to agreeable terms between the two parties. And so with what's in discussion at the moment, I think we're getting closer, and we do have meetings again scheduled for this week. But again, it is a boundary road, so we are looking for agreeable terms for both parties in that respect.
Thank you. Follow-up, Councillor?
Yes, just to say through your Mayor Salonen that I appreciate the work that you're doing. I realize that some members of the public are criticizing us for the time that it's taking, but at the same time, I would say I appreciate you being responsible and acting on our behalf. So thank you.
Councillor Cressman.
Through you, Mayor, and I had an opportunity, I know Nancy Burris, and I responded to her with an email about some of the things that council was working on, as well as some of the realities of liability, and she appreciated it and got back to me and responded. So I've taken the opportunity, if it's people that I am aware of and know personally, I respond to their emails and say, you know, we're working as diligently as possible on this. We don't want to miss this opportunity either as a legacy gift to the township, but as well, we have to bear in mind the safety of the people who are participating on the trails and the liability to the township. And those are all things that have to be weighed.
Very good. Any other items that councillors want to pull from correspondence? I actually wanted to pull 11.7 on the similar topic. This was Rory Farnan's Snyder's Land donation email. I just wanted to provide clarity on the letter from the City of Waterloo from November of 2022. That was prior to there being any formal submission to the Township of Wilmot. So although in theory it's great that somebody from the City of Waterloo might endorse in essence or in spirit a donation, it was prior to any staff having to do any professional work regarding the logistics and, of course, as we've already discussed tonight, the liability issue. So I just want to remind everyone that our staff are doing their job that they are hired to do by the Township of Wilmot, and they're looking out for our best interests. And I just really want to reiterate to our staff that I appreciate the work that you continue to do, and echo the comments of my fellow councillors that we look forward to finding an agreeable solution that works for everyone, including our insurance provider. So we look forward to when that does come back, when you guys have a solution. On to consent agenda items. And the recommendation is that consent agenda item 12.1 be approved. To first get this on the floor, may I have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Councillor Wilkinson, seconded by Councillor Martin. Would anybody like to comment or pull any items from this list? No? Okay, seeing none. Okay, I was waiting for that. Councillor Dunstall.
Sorry, thank you, through you, Mayor. I got mixed up with my numbers. When I saw this, I was a little surprised that all three of the people that were being reappointed were from KW, so I did a little bit of research, and out of the 15 representatives, there are only 2 from townships, and having 4 townships in our region, that seemed a little underrepresented. Our urban centers have different challenges and opportunities than our rural centers. So my recommendation would be to ask the GRAAC to make more of a concerted effort to engage the townships to ensure that we have better representation at the table out of the 15.
So Councillor Dunstall, is that an amendment that you'd like to add to approving these 3?
That is, okay, thank you. Sorry, through you, Mayor. That is, however, I obviously don't want to stop the process of those 3 people being enter their positions, for lack of a better word. But yes, I would like to see that as an amendment, that we do make more of an effort to have more rural voices at the table.
Very good. Clerk, is that enough clarity for you if we, okay. Is there a seconder to this amendment? Seconded by Councillor Martin. Any comments on the amendment? Councillor Martin.
Through you, Mayor Salonen, just to express appreciation to Councillor Dunstall for bringing this point up, and I must admit that I didn't realize that was the makeup of the committee, and so it does cause concern for me as well. And I think we really need to have representation from the townships in terms of the Grand River, as I understand this committee. It's true that our river is the Nith River, but that flows into the Grand River, and I believe that the Grand River Committee then has responsibilities that include the Nith, or unless somebody wants to correct me on that. So yes, I think this is important.
Yes, I think they honestly just chose the Grand River as a point to name their committee nicely. GRAAC's work is the advisory body that comments on a lot of applications. Staff can jump in to provide further detail. I know that they're often a commenting body for a lot of standards that the region deals with, and they are kind of the overarching body, but my understanding is Grand River is they thought that was a nice ring to it, but it is meant to represent everyone, including those who live around the Nith. If that makes sense. So we have the amendment before us then, that is that we give direction for GRCA to more actively recruit rural members to their board. Any other comments or questions on that? Councillor Cressman.
Yes, I guess it's just a matter of semantics, and I'm looking to the clerk for his advice that actually we would approve the motion as it stands, but give further direction to in the future look for rural. I think that's the spirit and the intent of the motion.
Over to the clerk.
Yes, through you, Mayor. I would agree. So I believe the amended motion would read something along the lines of what is printed on your agenda, and then another and further that in subsequent recruitments, we'll word this appropriately, that GRAC, or Grand River Accessibility Advisory Committee, makes more of a concerted effort to reach out to the townships to ensure fair and equitable representation.
Perfect.
Very good. Any other questions or comments on the amendment? Okay, so I will call the vote for the amendment. All those in favor? That carries unanimously. Any other outstanding questions or comments on the now amended motion? Nope, seeing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. On to reports, 13.1. The recommendation is that the Township of Wilmot declares portions of the Peel Street and Mill Street road allowances described and illustrated in Report DS 2024-04 as surplus lands, and that the mayor and clerk be authorized to execute the necessary documents to transfer the surplus land to Love Your Neighborhood Communities, known as LINK, subject to the following. 1, that the lands be transferred for the nominal amount of $2. 2, that the transfer of the surplus lands occur at the time of or concurrent with site plan approval for the development of 183 Mill Street and 34 Peel Street. 3, that costs related to the preparation and registration of a reference plan for the surplus lands and road widening lands be borne by Link. And 4, that the Township of Wilmot be responsible for legal costs incurred by the township with respect to the transfer of surplus lands and acquisition of road allowance widenings. To get this on the floor, may I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Dunstall. I will now turn it back over to our Manager of Planning and Economic Development, Andrew Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Solomon. Very briefly, Council considered this property earlier in January. That report provided the required 10 days notice before council actually declaring lands to be surplus. So we did go through the acquisition and disposal of lands in detail in that report. Essentially, the steps outlined in the bylaw have now been completed. This would be the final step in actually declaring it surplus and directing that the transfer of lands be to Link. And again, that ultimately that facilitation and ultimate transfer would happen at the conclusion of the site plan approval process once the lines are established 100% accurately and then the development's right proceed at that point. So I'm certainly available to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions or comments on this, councillors? Seeing none, I will now call the vote. All those in favor? That carries unanimously. On to our bylaws. The recommendation is that bylaws 2024-03, bylaw 2024-08. Oh, only those two? Sorry, they are separate. I was trying to save time here. Okay, that's what I get for that. All right, that bylaw 2024-03 as attached to this agenda be read a second and third time and finally passed in open council, and further that bylaw 2024-08 as attached to this agenda be read a first, second, and third time and finally passed in open council. May I please have a mover for that? Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Cressman. Any comments or questions? Seeing none, Councillor Cressman.
Through you, Mayor, I think I know what the answer is, but 14.2, the allocation of costs, because it came in under budget, the costs allocated are less than what they originally were anticipated, but it isn't that any pot of money is sitting around to go back into the treasury. It just means that the people whose land it crossed don't have to pay as much as they originally thought. That's my interpretation. Is that the correct? And I'm looking at, who am I looking at?
I believe that would be for our deputy clerk, Ms. Boss.
Thank you, Councillor Cressman, and through you, Mayor Salonen. So no money has been collected for this drainage works as of yet. So we just will amend the actual cost schedule, and then we will collect those fees.
Councillor Martin.
Through you, Mayor Salonen, just a question about process. Are we dealing with these two bylaws separately?
No, they get voted on together. I just couldn't lump sum put them in because the one we had already read the first reading at our last council meeting.
Oh, I see. Okay, I
Yes.
misunderstood, so I was
So it
curious
was just a
why-
technical
Got it.
thing. But yes, no, we are going to be passing, or I suppose defeating both in the same motion. All right, any other questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? That carries unanimously. Notices of motion, we do have one this evening, and I will pass it over to Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you. Through the chair, this is actually referencing back our previous meeting 2 weeks ago, so a few items on the agenda tonight referencing back, but there was a letter from the Association of Ontario Road Supervisors essentially asking us to draft correspondence and call on the province to essentially put together a training program or help facilitate a training program for roadworks employees. So seeing it as a cause worth fighting for, I certainly wanted to put this forward and make sure that we do draft that correspondence. That's why it's on the agenda this evening.
Very good. Is there a seconder for this motion? Seconded by Councillor Martin. Any questions or comments, councillors? I do just have a question of clarity. I am supportive of the motion. I just want to know that in the therefore be it resolved that the Township of Wilmot supports the work of the association, that specific paragraph, that it's clear that we aren't asking for staff to actually do any of the work. I don't believe it is, but I do just want that clarity, that it's more so in spirit we are supportive of, and then writing a letter to the province to actually conduct the work.
Through the chair, this was basically the wording that they had provided over to the letter. Yeah, I agree. It would certainly be in the spirit of, as opposed to actually sending anybody to work for another group. Lord knows we don't have the funds for that.
Just wanted to be super clear on that because I know it was the wording from the correspondence. That is great. Any other comments or questions on councillors? Seeing none, all those in favor? That carries unanimously. As for announcements, there are a few that I have, and then I know some other councillors have some as well. Tomorrow is Pancake Tuesday, and there are lots of events happening in Wilmot. To recognize this specifically, Wilmot's Youth Action Council is going to be hosting a Pancake Tuesday fundraiser at the Wilmot Rec Complex tomorrow between 5 and 7:30 p.m. The cost is $5 a person or $20 a family, cash only, and all proceeds will be going to Youth Week 2024. Tomorrow evening, after you get your pancakes, we recommend that you head on over to Waterloo Oxford District Secondary School to hear award-winning author and agricultural historian speak about Queen's Bush Settlement and the history of agriculture in southwestern Ontario. That's going to be Nicola Jane who's presenting, and this is part of us recognizing Black Excellence or Black History Month. Nicola Jane is going to be giving us some background information on the African settlement of Queen's Bush and its history that I did not know until relatively recently. So it should be a really great event. Looking forward to it. And Nicola Jane will actually be joining us via YouTube as she is currently on a journey, a Sankofa 100-mile freedom tour, which is for her to learn about ancestral roots of her own. So she will be joining us, I believe, from Jamaica. But we do hope to see you there, and this event is actually in partnership with the Township of Wellesley as well as Waterloo Oxford District Secondary School. So thank you to our fellow partners and hoping to see you all there. That will be at 7 p.m. We also have Heritage Day coming up on Saturday, February the 17th. The Heritage Wilmot and Castle Kilbride Advisory Committee are proud to present Heritage Day 2024, celebrating Wilmot's heritage. The free event takes place from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. at New Dundee Community Centre, and food is available for purchase, so come on out and learn more about Wilmot. Lastly for me is Family Day on Monday, February the 19th. The Township of Wilmot is hosting a great roster of Family Day activities at the Rec Complex. You can visit wilmot.ca/Family Day to get details on swims, skates, and more. And thank you to event sponsors that include MP Tim Lewis and the Baden Community Association. I will pass it over to Councillor Cressman for another great announcement.
So, tomorrow is Canadian Agriculture Day, and you're to raise your fork and make a noise for agriculture. So, if I speak loudly, that's about the biggest noise I can make. And my wife, when I chose this as a Christmas gift, cutlery, everyday cutlery, many years ago, it wasn't a bowling ball. She said, "Why did you choose such large utensils?" But anyhow, we won't go there. But anyhow, tomorrow is Canadian Agriculture Day. Part of that is to raise funds for the food bank. Tomorrow night, Ontario Pork and the Kitchener Rangers are joining forces at the Kitchener Auditorium and raising funds for the food bank of Waterloo Region. And one of the outcomes of the Roma conference, since Steve Martin and I, Councillor Martin and I, were privileged to stay through to the last speaker, after 4 draws for the door prize, yours truly won $3,000 for the charity of my choice. And so I have chosen through the council, and Jeff Clerk Bunn is helping me move the money. $1,500 will be given to the food bank of the Waterloo Region, $1,500 to the Wilmot Resource Centre, and the family farm that I'm part of will be adding some cash to both of those. And I challenge, in response to Canadian Agriculture Day, other farm families to drop food items off at Sobeys or at the Wilmot Resource Centre or at No Frills, and or checks or cash. So looking at raising, because this time of year we're getting low. And Wilmot Family Resource, I didn't know it until I went into their website, talked to their staff, that they supply food items to Wilmot Township and southern Wellesley. So you can take whatever, whatever southern part of Wellesley you want to talk about. So I've taken enough time, but I think a worthy cause, and I'm pleased to participate.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cressman, and I'm happy to hear that you've made your decision on the Roma donations, and that's wonderful news. Thank you for supporting our local communities. Councillor Dunstall.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Just a couple of announcements. Living Water Foundation is having their spaghetti dinner fundraiser February 24th from 6 to 8 at 45 Hink Street. The Legion is having a mac and cheese and hot dog lunch on February 23rd from 12 to 1. And I believe that the New Dundee Optimist, and I'm going to have to go back here and look at my date because I do believe that they want this to be shared. They are having a spaghetti dinner on Monday, February 19th from 4 to 7 p.m. And that's at the New Dundee Community Centre. Thank you.
Very good. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Salonen. I wanted to not speak about an upcoming event, but to comment, and you've mentioned Black History Month, so thank you for doing that. Black excellence, as you pointed out. And so a week ago Sunday, I was at the Canadian Caribbean Association of Waterloo Region. They had their event at the Ken Sealing Museum. And so it was a great event. Learned a lot of things, not the least being a young man, I think he's only 17 years old, with his business and selling T-shirts and different items of Black history, and so I bought a T-shirt about Emancipation Day, August 1st, and may say more about that again in 2 weeks' time, and I look forward to the talk tomorrow night, so just wanted to make reference to the things that are happening.
Thank you very much. Any other announcements or comments at this time, councillors? Seeing none. Business arising from closed. There is one motion arising from closed, and that council receives advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for purpose in accordance with Section 239 2F relating to 4 matters, including a planning application matter, air monitoring study, a procurement matter, and a matter relating to a term of reference. May I please have a mover for that? Moved by Councillor Dunstall, seconded by Councillor Cressman. All those in favor? That carries unanimously. And everyone's favorite part of the night, adjournment. May I please have a mover? Moved by Councillor Dunstall, seconded by Councillor Martin. All those, I skipped over the confirmatory bylaw. I'm trying to pretend this meeting didn't happen, apparently. My apologies. We'll put the adjournment on pause. Confirmatory bylaw, that the confirmatory bylaw as attached to this agenda be read a first, second, and third time and finally passed in open council. May I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Wilkinson, seconded by Councillor Cressman. All those in favor? That passes. Clearly, I really want to adjourn our meeting, so we do have a mover and seconder already for that, or no? If I can get another mover. Moved by Councillor Dunstall, seconded by Councillor Martin. All those in favor? And we are adjourned. Have a great evening.